Hello there, my name is James Baldwin and welcome to another episode of Extreme E's official podcast, Off Track. In this episode, we chat with the boss of it all. That's right, it's Alejandro Agag. And I'm joined, as always, by my friend and yours. And as I said last time, the friendship does continue on. I'm happy to say it does even continue even further for this season. It's Michael Laminato. Hello, mate.
Yes, every week a blessing. Absolutely right. But I hope you're ready. I guess this is our KPI episode if we're talking to the boss, right?
As I said to him at the very end, I was like, thanks so much for being on what effectively is your podcast.
Yes, absolutely. I hope he enjoyed it. I mean, I thought it was great. It was terrific to catch up with the man who invented the whole, not electric cars, of course, although I'm sure if he could have, he would have. But set up, of course, all of Extreme E, the reason we're here, as well as Formula E. We're going to talk a little bit about that as well. And he had a lot to say.
He did. And it's what I really enjoyed was all of our other episodes in terms of interviews. We've spoken to some wonderful people and all of them have mentioned just how energetic and forward-thinking Alejandro is. And surely you will think the same after listening to this. Of course, there was a very turbulent time starting Formula E. We talked to him about the comparison that is often made between Formula One and if that is indeed the right comparison. And then the effective good idea pinata of taking electric SUVs and sending them to far-flung corners of the world and then how to actually get them there.
Yes, and what it's like to buy an enormous ship, which is something I think many of us probably will never do in our lives. That's not a slight on anyone. It just is. I mean, why would you? There's very few reasons you would need a ship that big. Luckily, he had one. Because, I mean, imagine that. You go out one day and you rock up back home with a ship. You've sold your car. You probably need to sell more than just your car to buy a ship that size, wouldn't you? But we'll talk about that. And, of course, he's got a lot to say as well about, of course, being in the shadow of COP26, which undoubtedly you've seen on the news, that there's a role for everyone to play in this challenge. At the heart of Extreme E is the climate challenge we're all facing. And it's easy to get wrapped up into who's doing the right thing and the wrong thing and all that kind of thing. Of course, we all need to ultimately push together in one direction, but there is room for everyone to play a role in combating climate change.
Well, it's great to have you here on the podcast for this chat. So let's get into it. Here is our interview with Alejandro Agag.
Well, it's a great pleasure to welcome to Extreme E Off Track the man who runs it all, the big boss, the CEO of Extreme E. It's Alejandro Agag. Alejandro, thanks so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be with you guys. Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
Look, we're talking on almost the eve of the final round of the season. Of course, we're going to talk about the setup for this season, a little bit more about the sport. But what I really want to know, you've developed quite the portfolio of sports activities in the last so many years, of course, capped off most recently with Extreme E. But I want to go way back before Formula E, before anyone has probably even heard of you. I want to go back to the start. I want to know what you were like as a kid. How did you grow up to become the Alejandro of today? Did teenage Alejandro look anything or think anything like he does now?
Not really, no. I mean, I was, I essentially was a very happy kid. I grew up in Spain, in Madrid, which is a great place. I was going to a nice school. I had, my parents are great. We were a very happy family, but without any kind of specific interest. I mean, my mom was a local politician, so that might be the only kind of like link to what I did after that. But no, I just, I was a normal kid, quite shy in a way. I had glasses, which was a big thing for me at the time. They were all the kids in my class would make fun of me and call me Four Eyes, which is something quite common in Spain. But yeah, apart from that, nothing very special. I then went on to study in New York for a year, my last year of school, and then I immediately went into politics. But really, I was a pretty normal kid.
We're talking about politics, Alejandro, and it's probably fair to say, isn't it, that you had a very rapid and successful rise starting in your teenage years. As you just mentioned, your mum was a politician, so it was a clear path for you to go down that road. And we're used to talking about racing drivers who were very clearly talented, either doing go-karts or off-road, or their parents were rally drivers or instructors getting into a first car or a bike. Was it for you as in a politician's family, I suppose? What was the equivalent for you? Were you around for a lot of meetings? Were you just super proud of what your mum was doing in the space where she was? What was it for you?
Yes, I mean, I I have very good memories of when my mom was in politics. I mean, she was only in politics for a very few years and for a very small number of years, and she was a local politician in our village, so to say, or in our little town. But I remember going at night, and at the time it was a time where you could stick like posters with the faces of the candidates on the walls in some place in town. So we were doing that at night, and I remember that with very fond memories. But she wasn't any kind. She didn't have any big position or anything like that. But I probably that gave me like my first taste of politics when I was maybe 10 years old.
And that led you all sorts of places, to the European Union, all that kind of stuff. But I want to know where the motorsport story then starts, because you had great success in politics. It's pretty easy to continue with something you're successful when you're a young man. Where did they intersect? Because we know that around, I think 2002, wasn't it, that you absolutely moved into the sporting sphere. Why was that?
Well, it's kind of an interesting story. So I started politics when I was 18, and it went very well. I focused on international politics, and very quickly, when I was 25, I became the secretary of the prime minister of Spain. We won the elections that time, but we called him the president in Spain. So I became the kind of the assistant of the president. And at 28, I was elected the youngest member of European Parliament. I went on to the European People's Party to be the Secretary General. So it actually went quite well and quite fast. But my boss was at the time the president of Spain. And my ambition, of course, was to be a minister eventually on one of his governments. But then I started dating his daughter. So, became a bit of a conflict of interest, if you want to call it like that. And then I decided to marry her. Or she decided to marry me, I guess. Or we both decided to marry each other. So we decided the best thing was to stop politics because, it was going to be too complicated. So I really had to choose between marrying my wife or continuing my career. So I decided to sacrifice my career, which was probably the best decision I've ever made. And then I didn't have a job. But I had friends. I had lots of friends. And two of my friends were Bernie Ecclestone and Flavio Briatore. And they said, listen, why don't we do things together? Because in Spain, I'm of course from Spain. In Spain, they couldn't sell the TV rights. Bernie couldn't sell the TV rights. Nobody wanted to watch Formula One. But Flavio had a young kid who he said, I think he's really good. And he's Spanish. So if this kid does well, Formula One will become very big in Spain. So we were actually lucky enough, Flavio and I, to make a deal with Bernie in which we got the rights at quite a good price. Well, I didn't have any money, so I was basically gambling in a way. And then the kid was Fernando Alonso. He went to win the World Championship twice, and Formula One became the hottest thing in Spanish media. And the rest is history.
So not bad. Not a bad story. What about for you, your first experience of motorsport though? Because I always love hearing people who are deeply involved in motorsport often have that one moment where you fell in love with it. Was it the sound of something? Was it the smell of something maybe in motorsport? What was the first taste for you? So
the first days I was a kid, my parents were living for a number of years in Monaco. And the apartment where they were living, I was going to school still in Madrid, but I was going back and forth a lot. And I was, I think, 13 at the time. And the apartment that my parents were renting had been the apartment of a Formula One driver before. And I remember in the drawer in my side table next to my bed, there were some stickers of Formula One teams or sponsors or whatever. And then the race, my first view of Formula One was actually from the balcony of our apartment, overlooks the entrance to the corner that goes into the tunnel, the Mirabeau corner that goes down and then goes into the tunnel. So I could see that from the balcony. And that was the first time I saw, I've seen it on TV before, but it was the first time I saw for real a Formula One car. And and then I was like, wow, this is amazing. So that was my first kind of memory of motorsport. Then I didn't really follow it for a long time because I was in politics for a long time. And then when we started with Flavio and Bernie, then of course I started going to every race. Yes,
well, I think Fernando Alonso will go far. He's a good rookie. I'm sure there's lots of talent in him.
That's what we said at the beginning. That's what we said 22 years ago. We said, maybe this kid will do okay. And he did.
And you know what? He's still doing okay. He's still smiling and having the best time. It is great to see him back in Formula One. That is for sure. Alejandro, look, Formula E, let's talk a little bit about this, because this is a mega part, of course, of your life, but also of motorsporting history too.
Yeah.
But it wasn't your first step into motorsport world, as you said, with the TV rights in Formula One and Fernando, of course, and of course GP2. But Formula E feels like the defining point in your racing career, as we've said. Tell us about the moment that all of this came together. You've been operating in the F1 space. You've seen wheel-to-wheel racing and the love of the sport and what Bernie's been doing with it. Where did Formula E come from?
So, of course, I was very involved in different areas of racing. So I had, of course, the TV rights business. So that made me learn how the TV and the broadcasting part of the racing worked. Then I had the GP2 team. So I was a competitor. I knew the economics of a team. I knew also how to get the drivers and how to bring them through to Formula One. Then I had also another business, which was a sponsorship business. So I was bringing big sponsors into Formula One, to teams. I was bringing sponsors also to the championship, to F1, to Bernie and Paddy McNally at the time. So I had, let's say, my hand in all different areas, which gave me a very good understanding of how each area worked. But then I realized that more and more the sponsors and the partners were more and more concerned about sustainability, which is something that has always, of course, worried me and interested me. But I saw that there was a big problem there. So that's probably about 15 years ago when I thought we should find a way to do this greener in a more sustainable way. And this is combustion, and eventually combustion will finish. So then a few years later, I heard about a car that these guys had made in their garage, basically in France, called Formulec. And it was the first, they took a Formula 3 and they basically retrofitted it with a battery and an electric motor, and it was kind of working. I mean, it wasn't working too much, but it was kind of working. So I said, okay, now we're ready. We have to go for this. So then I remember everything came together with at a dinner in Paris in February 2011 with Jean Todt, where we basically decided to create an electric car championship. I mean, he decided to create an electric car championship. Then I had to tender for it, and I wasn't going to get it. There was a bunch of things, and I mean, luck prevailed in the end, and I got the rights to create the championship. But that was the beginning. Then it was really hard after that, really hard. But everything is hard in life. So, you cannot complain. You just go for it. And luckily we managed to survive. And then now it's brilliant.
It's really easy now to look back because it's firing on all cylinders. You've even moved on to your next project. We're talking to you now. You're a very busy and successful man. But the blank canvas aspect of Formula E was obviously what made it a great business opportunity, as you said. But obviously any blank canvas is a huge risk. No one's done it before, which means there's no template necessarily. Do you doubt yourself in those situations? Like, what's your mental process when you're embarking on a big, ambitious idea like that?
Well, you have so many problems coming your way, and so many times you go like, oh my God, is this going to work? But basically, the way I work is just to, like a little bit like a donkey, you put these things in your eyes here and you just kind of look forward and keep looking forward and don't allow anything to distract you, because so many people tell you you're going to fail. So many people tell you it's impossible. So many people tell you you'll never make it. So if you listen to those people, then you stop. And that's the only thing you cannot do, stop. You have to keep going. And even when you think you're bankrupt or you're finished, there's always one little opportunity that you can maybe survive. If that happens, you have to go for that one. I mean, when after 4 races, we owed $25 million to suppliers after the first 4 races of Formula E, and I had $100,000 in the bank.
Oh.
So that was I couldn't sleep at night. But there was a possibility to go raise capital, fix it, and we did. And but like I say, you just go like a donkey. You put these things in next to your eyes and you just look forward.
A big part of course, the Formula E story is that it's the electric aspect, as you talked about. It's the sign that the world is moving on, the sustainability aspect. Obviously, that connection's been made for Formula E. The combination works, the sport fires, all that kind of thing. But in terms of getting that connection, particularly the mobility aspect accepted amongst the general public, that motorsport can be green, is green, maybe will always have to be green after this. How do you see progress being made in that public sphere?
So now progress is very fast, but in the beginning it was very slow. So when we started Formula E, when we announced that we were going to do Formula E, which was at some point in 2012, there was a big skepticism. I mean, no one thought there was the need for it. So why these guys are doing an electric car race? Why do we need an electric car race? Second, people were not really talking about electrification in mobility still. Dieselgate hadn't happened, which was actually a big accelerator of electrification. There was Tesla, but Tesla was kind of a one-off, considered to be kind of isolated in there, making these electric cars. There had been Fisker at the time who didn't make it. So electric cars were not like they are today. Today, everybody's talking about electrification. Manufacturers are putting electric cars on the road, like by the dozens of models every time. But yeah, the progress was slow. Today, look at the landscape. You have DTM going electric. You have ETCR. You have EGT. You have Formula One trying to go as hybrid and sustainable as possible. I think all that, it's a result of the pioneering work done by Formula E. I think everything else is coming because Formula E opened the way for electric motorsport. And I think, I don't like to take credit too many times, but this time I'm going to take credit. Formula E opened the way for the electrification of the sport.
As you should. And I love it. And we'll talk about Extreme E, of course, in a little bit. When McLaren announced their entry into the sport, Zach Brown put out a release saying that when you first came to Formula One to talk about Formula E all those years ago, that you were almost laughed out of the room.
Yeah.
Fast forward, of course, to 2019, 2020, and you have the greats of Formula One, including Zach Brown, who was probably one of the people who were laughing at the time, now coming across to you. That must have been, of course, a fantastic feeling now, maybe not so much then. But from a Formula One point of view, do you think Formula E is compared too often to Formula One? And should it be? Is that a fair comparison? Or is it that the Formula E is going down the different path altogether, and that it was just unfortunate at the time that it was around and the media circus that ended up happening around it, that it pushed it into that position?
Well, I think Formula E, it's inevitable that it's compared to Formula One. I think, of course, it's not the right comparison because the technology, we should compare Formula E to Formula One 7 years old. That's a fair comparison. And if you look at the cars that were racing in 1957, which is Formula One, the first, if you consider Formula One was born in 1950, which is actually the day that it was born, you should look at the cars Formula One had in 1957. Formula E is faster, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a bit of a provocation or a joke, but we need still, we have a lot to grow. And also Formula One in the beginning was a very kind of was really cool, but it was really let's say amateur. There were a bunch of guys working from their garages. I find that really kind of fascinating and fantastic. And I really love the history of Formula One. I think it's a super important part of the whole Formula One brand. But we're making our own history, and we're only 7 years old in Formula E. I think the comparison is it doesn't matter, but I think Formula E is going to accept, is going to how would I put it, to get to where Formula One is today a lot faster than 77 years or 80 years or whatever. We're going really fast. If you look at Generation 3, we are in Generation 2. Generation 3 car is going to be a massive step forward. And Generation 4, if you ask me, is going to be right there where Formula One is today in terms of performance.
Everyone put Generation 4 in the calendar then, absolutely. I can't wait for that one. Look, let's move on to Extreme E though, the main event, because I want to compare it just briefly to Formula E, but we can move on absolutely because, there's the mobility aspect of Formula E. We sort of understand that argument is well established, that it's about proving what's possible, I suppose. But it strikes me that Extreme E is more about the issue of climate change, the reason maybe why you should be moving into the electric space, for example. Is it fair to say that Extreme E has more of an activist mission or objective to it? And What was the motivation behind setting it up?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, Extreme E has more of an activist mission, which is born a bit of a a few convictions that I have and that I defend. My main one is that everybody should be involved in climate action. Everyone, because the problem today is that so many people take the high moral ground and they decide who's good and who's bad, and I think that is wrong. I think that as long as people want to do the right thing, they should be welcome into the climate action, let's say, movement. I'll give you specific examples. For me, what activists do is very important. I mean, you have people like Greta Thunberg, or you have people like, even if you go to the extremes, Extinction Rebellion or whatever, they play their own role. They have a role, which is to raise the alarm. But those people are not going to change the world. They're not. Well, basically, they can't. They don't have the means to change the world at all. They may make possible for the people who can't change the world to change it, because they create the right state of mind. They raise the alarm. They raise the alert. People are like, oh, this is really bad. And then the ones who can change the world are the oil companies. The one who can change the world are the energy companies. The one who can change the world are the car companies. The one who can change the world are all the big corporations that really need to change what they're doing. So if you start by excluding those, you've lost the fight from the beginning. You cannot say, we don't want to, if today we had the choice to push a button and make oil disappear, we could not do it. We would have massive collapse of civilization. We have to do the transition in an organized way. And real change will only happen in the real world. Real change is not going to happen in some kind of fairy tale that these people live in. It needs to happen in the real world. So this is, for me, a really important message of Extreme E. Extreme E is motorsport, and motorsport has to play a role in climate action. And that's why we go to these places and so on and so on. And it's very interesting. People who criticize it says, "No, but you have a carbon footprint, and therefore you shouldn't do it." You don't have to look at that. You have to, of course, minimize your carbon footprint, and we do. But you have to look at the impact that you have. And if the impact is a lot larger than your carbon footprint, then it's worth it. And the impact of Extreme E, it's huge in terms of research, in terms of development of the technology, in terms of awareness for electric cars, and in terms of the projects that we do in the places where we go, the legacy that we have now. So I think, I mean, as you see, I'm very passionate about this, but for me, it's a really important message of inclusive climate action, not exclusive climate action. That's what Extreme E stands for.
We'll get back to our chat with Alejandro in just a second, but this is the last part now of our long-running chat with Lucy Woodall, a member of the Extreme E Scientific Committee, Professor Lucy Woodall. Over the last couple of episodes, you can go back and have a listen to them. We've been talking about various threats to the ocean climate in particular in terms of the challenge of climate change. And on the theme, I suppose, of some of the things we're talking about with Alejandro is this idea that there is room for everyone to commit something to fighting climate change. And Extreme E is one component of that. And one important part of that is that it is bringing so many different people together, so many different spheres of the world, if you like, are coming together with that one aim. And it can be really valuable. Certainly, we hope that it'll prove valuable. That is why we're all here. So we talked to Lucy Woodall about the value of having Extreme E. And finally, Lucy, to wrap this one up, and thank you so much for being so generous with your time. Extreme E, the purpose of it is to be able to tell this message to more people, to bring, of course, naturally the people who are fans of motorsport under the umbrella of being interested in and understanding the actions required to combat climate change. So first of all, how important is it that we do have alternative ways to get the message out as opposed to try to hope that people will read enormous, for example, IPCC reports or what have you? And the direct legacy program of Extreme E, how important is it to not only have the messaging component, but back it up with some occasionally small scale, but still important practical action?
Yeah, you've brought up two really important aspects here. We're chatting about climate change in the ocean, and actually, if you gave me, I would probably be talking to you about this in another month's time. So that's fine. I love the ocean. That's where I feel safe. But we all have our different values, our different beliefs, our different understandings of how the ocean can benefit us. And I think the first aspect you spoke around there was messaging. Because actually, even if we never see the ocean, we never go to the beach, we hang out in the middle of cities which aren't anywhere near the sea, we are still impacted daily by the ocean because of the contributions the ocean has in our weather patterns, in how our climate impacts us as humans. So I think that's the first thing to mention. So when we can communicate with different people, and that's got to be a two-way communication. It can't be me as an ocean scientist going, hey folks, let's learn everything we can about the ocean because then you're going to be as clever as I am. Because let's face it, I only know a tiny proportion and I can learn as much from the people that I talk to as hopefully they will get from me. So it's really important there's a two-way dialogue to understand where people's perceptions of the ocean lie and where the benefits and values come from. Because let's face it, actually, when we talk about ocean management, we're really talking about human management and human behavior. So we have to be experts on understanding how we get behavior change that is going to be beneficial for society in the future. And if we can do that by interacting with different sectors, like with car racing enthusiasts, that's wonderful because they've got something to learn, but they've also got something to share so that I learn as an ocean scientist. And I think that it's really important that we listen and share ideas humbly so that we get the best of that. And I think those dialogues is something that I really value, sort of listening and being part of that Extreme E community and team. You also mentioned legacy projects. And as you suggested, everywhere where there's a race, there is a legacy project. And these purposely have been quite small and quite community and locally driven, because that's where we see the impacts of climate change. We don't necessarily see them in parliament buildings or ministry offices. We see them, and we see them in local communities that are on our shorelines, that are in our areas that are not now suffering from desertification. So, for example, in Senegal, and this was the legacy project that I was most involved in, because it was, a specifically marine one, was the planting of mangroves. Now, planting mangroves is great. We've said that they're really valuable for lots of different reasons. But actually, how we go about that planting is important, because we need to make sure that if planting happens, it's done so in a way that is representative of what was there in the past. We need to understand why maybe there's not mangroves in that location, to make sure that those stressors that have removed mangroves in the past are not there still. And so this was done with an NGO, Oceanium, who have worked with communities in Senegal for many years. They understand the challenge. So I'm not going to go and tell them how to do this. That they're the experts. They cultivate the plants, they replant them, they do an assessment of the survival rates of those mangroves, and then also do an assessment of how those new mangrove forests are impacting positive on lives of the communities. And mangroves are really important for many reasons. But just directly linked to climate change, estuary and coastal mangroves together store 14 times more carbon than tropical forests. And I'm just going to let that sit with you for one moment. These legacy projects, as I said, are directly related to the consequences of climate change, trying to mitigate some of these as well. But they help communities directly. And I think that's what's really important, to say, well, actually, we can come in with a great messaging and get a global coverage. But actually, unless we are listening and working directly with communities involved, then it's incredibly hard to get long-term traction. And of course, there's been many other legacy projects in different sites. So we had some turtle protection in Saudi Arabia, and there was a childhood awareness of climate change campaign through UNICEF in Greenland. So I think those just give you some examples of some of the options that were taken in year one. But what I'm really excited to do is understand in years 2, 3, 10, 50, where we're going to be going. And if anyone's got any ideas, then of course the team would be really love to hear them.
That was the last part of our chat with Professor Lucy Woodall from the Extreme E Scientific Committee. And you can go back and hear the rest of her chat over the last couple of episodes of Extreme E Off Track. You should already be subscribed. If you're not, what are you doing? Well, it's a good thing that you've arrived here, I suppose. Stumbled across. Now you can hit the subscribe button, get all of the previous episodes. There's no point searching. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of manpower to search. Just let the subscription button do it for you. Let's get back into our chat now, though, with Alejandro.
Alejandro, you said that obviously it was quite stressful after the first 4 events of Formula E, but embarking on Extreme E, it's a much bigger beast almost, isn't it? It's better contained than Formula E. There's fewer people, smaller teams, fewer events, but obviously the concept is a lot larger, racing in these remote parts of the world, as you said, and in uncontrolled environments. And that was before the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
How was it as a challenge to create? Talk us through the first sort of ideas that you had around this project, who you spoke to, the kind of parts of the world that you wanted to race in. What can we expect, I guess, from that, and then for next year as well?
So to create Extreme E has been a lot harder than I expected. I thought, I've done Formula E, which was hard. This is going to be not a piece of cake, but it's going to be a lot easier. I was so wrong. It's been a nightmare, like a huge challenge every single time. And there are problems coming from every direction. Racing in Greenland was like racing in the moon. We needed to it was impossible to organize. So there is nothing there. We have to bring things from Denmark. We have to bring people from other countries. There was really, really nothing. And as a result, it's even better. It's even more rewarding because you are doing something that has never been done. You take races to places that never happened. And you prove that you're not causing any damage on site. Effectively, the mayor of the village or the town where we race is gonna keep those flags there because he wants to make it a kind of touristic attraction for people to say, here's where Sebastian Loeb overtook this guy, or here's Carlos Sainz did this maneuver or whatever. So they really, really love it because nobody really goes to Greenland. Nobody, remembers them. But, there are people who are so grateful that, a big event with global impact came to that place. So really, really hard, but really, really rewarding at the same time. And, we want to keep doing it. I'm going to Brazil next week to try to make happen our race there, which is even more challenging. We have to go all the way up the Amazon River, then offload all the things on the rainforest. It's going to be really a big challenge, but that's what Extreme E stands for, the big challenge, and to showcase what's going on in those locations. So, yeah, I'm super happy with it. I'm so happy we're here. We survived 4 races. The cars break down. We were not expecting the drivers to go so crazy fast over this kind of completely crazy terrains. It's hard, but we are going to get there.
Alejandro, what's it like to buy a huge ship? Does someone give you keys to it? Does it have a good smell, like a new boat smell? How do you do it?
Well, I'll only tell you, when my wife saw the ship, I thought she was going to kill me. That was a bit of a crazy idea. So I knew that I needed a ship for this championship. I knew that I needed my own transportation. Otherwise, we wouldn't make it to the place where we want to go. You cannot go from the Amazon to the Arctic on normal, DHL logistics, because they don't have the line that covers that route. So we needed our own ship. And then I read in an article that they were closing the airport of Santa Elena, and they were selling the ship that was the lifeline, half cargo, half passengers. I said, that's our ship. So I bought the ship without seeing it, and and the ship was really in a very, very bad condition inside. It's a beautiful ship. It's an amazing it's an amazing, lady, but with really, really bad, but it was not really well taken care of. So then I took my wife and kids to see the ship. The ship came here to I think we took it to down to Portland or something, south of England. We went to see the ship, and my wife looked at me and said, "Okay, now I know that you're completely mad." And but we redid the ship, we refurbished the ship, and now the ship is key. Because it's more than the logistics. The key is the heart of the operation. The key, the ship is also what make people dream, because you need to make people dream of something, and knowing that a ship is going from the Arctic to the Amazon with these electric cars, promoting climate action, that's part of the dream.
Alejandro, I'd like to ask you your feelings, how it felt when you had your first couple of team owners agree to be in the championship. As I mentioned before, when you pitched Formula E to Formula One members, they kind of laughed at you, and now you've got brands like McLaren joining for next year, and of course they have brought, and as we talk now, they've just launched the car and announced Emma Gilmore as the second driver. Huge outpouring from what is an incredibly passionate fan base of that racing team. What was it like for you to get people like all of the big names, which is every team, to join the championship?
I mean, it was great to see how many people wanted to get involved in the concept. And I think they get involved because exactly what I said, because our stand on climate action and on sustainability and trying to... So you see that the people, let's say, that believe in the concept far outweighs the people that criticize the concept. And, having Lewis Hamilton on board, having Jenson Button on board, having Nico Rosberg on board, as team owners, having Zach and McLaren, having GM with Hammer, having Abt with Cupra, it's great. It's great to have all these names backing it. And also the drivers that we have, because having Carlos Sainz, Sebastian Loeb, having Molly Taylor, having Emma, we have really great drivers. I think this concept female-male is working fantastically well. And I think what we've seen in these first 4 races is that the racing is amazing. I mean, when the cars don't break, which that makes me so upset, but we're going to fix it, you can see that the racing that is underlying there is going to be, I think it's going to be one of the best racing in the world. So I think we're there. I think the potential is huge. I think we're now on race 4. We will have finished the first season, fix all the things that need to be fixed. Actually, we needed a season to kind of get things together, because normally we would have done a full season of testing. And then the first season would have been everything normally working. But because of COVID, we just had to use the first season to test and tweak. But even like that, it's been amazing. The results, some of the races, I mean, especially if you look at the semifinals in Greenland, they were absolutely incredible. The final in Greenland was incredible. Some of the racing in Sardinia was incredible. I was really upset when Ganassi broke, I have to say, because I really wanted them to win, because, they really deserved it. But, having said that, Rosberg has done an amazing job, and Loeb has done an incredible job securing all these pole positions that are keeping him really close in the championship. So, yeah, it's very exciting to get to the end. And, you will have Lewis. I think Lewis has told me that he's going to be there at the last race. You will have Nico. So you have both Nico and Lewis head-to-head fighting for the championship, which is a pretty good result.
Sounds very familiar.
Out of the cars. Yeah, for everyone's safety, I think, keep them out of the cars. I want to bring you up on something.
You have an Australian. Molly is going to be fighting for the championship.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
it's going to be a great finale. I can't wait to see it unfold. I want to bring you up on something there. The split between male and females in this series, it's unusual in motorsports. It's unusual in most sports, to be honest. We've talked a lot about the environmental aspect of motorsport, why that needs to happen, why there needs to be some amount of leadership on motorsport's part. But the social license aspect is something that really interests me with sport. Like, everyone watches sport, sure, like it's on the back page of every newspaper. But how much do you think, particularly big sports that command a lot of attention, need to still win over a social license? And I'm thinking here about that gender equality issue in particular. Women's sports are increasing in popularity. How important will it be for more sports to, whether or not they necessarily split it down the middle, male and female, but to play for that social license?
I think sport should play a role. I think sport has to play a role. Sport has huge power. Now, if you look at like I always say, of the 25 most watched TV programs ever, 24 have been sports. Which shows how powerful sports is as a way of reaching people. sports shouldn't be political and not get into politics. But at the same time, there are some causes which are not political, and gender equality is not political. Gender equality, it's just fair. It's just like, it's how it should be. There is no politics there. That everybody should support that. So in those causes, definitely sports needs to be involved. One step beyond, if you get into politics, we get a lot of sometimes questions why we race in this country or this other country, and I say, if we look into that, I can only race in the Vatican, and even if so every country has its own problems, and if we mix the sports with that, you wouldn't have any sport. So you have to use a sport, not keep it away from politics, but definitely use a sport to defend causes which are above politics. And I think gender equality is clearly one of them, as is equality in general, and diversity. Those are questions that are above politics.
The politicization one is an interesting question. I want to briefly talk on this before we wrap up, because we're speaking shortly after COP26, which is the 26th meeting of the United Nations Climate Change Conference on this very issue, on climate change, of course it is. And humanity's been aware of climate change for a lot longer than just 26 years as well. It's been around for a long time. You've got a unique, or certainly a rare perspective from, let's say, inside the political tent and now outside it, trying to enact change from the business perspective. Why are we still battling so hard to just engage even a certain level of awareness? I mean, surely Extreme E ideally shouldn't need to exist, right? To try and convince people that these environments are being threatened?
Yeah. I look at all these things, or I try to kind of take distance from it. Imagine you kind of like look at what's happening on Earth from the moon, no? Or from a rocket. And you look from the distance, you say, okay, what's going on? And I think everyone is playing his role. And I think things are moving in the right direction. So, and when I say everyone is playing his role, is what I was meaning before. The activists, what's their role? Kick and scream. So they're kicking and screaming quite effectively. The politicians, what's their role? Keep things together, like not cause a massive damage in one side to create another effect on the other side. So they have to kind of make what's possible. I mean, if you would make one of these activists president of a country, they would immediately have to change their position and compromise, because it's not the same to be outside shouting, which it's necessary, like I say, than to run a country where people need to eat and people need to have heating in their homes in winter. You need to satisfy both. And then business people are also doing their own role. They need to maximize profit for their shareholders, because of course, if a company goes completely green and spends all their money into green projects, then the shareholders will be mad because they're not making money. So again, you need to balance the situation. But everybody now, or I think probably everybody's wrong, but I would say the majority of the actors are all going now in the same direction. And I think that's positive. And of course, some people are not happy that others are not going fast enough. Some people are trying to go fast, but they can't. But at least it's clear now to the majority that climate change is the main challenge that we have for this century.
Alejandro, we have been to some very spectacular locations so far for Extreme E in this season. Which of those has most strongly affected you? Of course, we've had the different legacy projects left behind at each of them. What's affected you the most, and what surprised you based on what you've seen?
So every location has really affected me, and you see the effect of what's going on. I mean, stepping in the beach in Senegal and seeing it full of plastic that is not Senegalese plastic. It's European plastic, it's American plastic that floats on the ocean and goes to the beach. That impresses. But if you go to Greenland and you see the Arctic ice cap melting, and I've been there already a few times over the years, and I've been to the Arctic ice cap, and I remember where the Arctic ice cap used to start, and now it starts 100 meters there, and it's from last year to this year. That impresses you. But also, and this is a problem you have also in Australia, I was really shocked when I was in Sardinia by the effect of the wildfires and how close those wildfires and that completely burned land and trees and everything were from houses and villages. I mean, I was thinking what these people must have felt when they had a fire on their doorstep, practically. So everywhere around the world, climate change is being felt, and everywhere around the world, you have the opportunity, sadly, to be shocked.
Absolutely right. I think that's the thing. We know it more than most in some cases in Australia. Before we wrap this one up, the message, I guess, is still hopefulness, right? Like, of all the things you've seen, you've been engaged for longer than most. We've been talking to a series of the scientific committee as well over the course of this podcast. There's usually a message for hope. Are you hopeful for the future?
I am very hopeful, yeah, and absolutely. I think we're a bit too pessimistic in terms of the messaging now in general. And I think we're getting the new generations scared. Like, my kids are like, shit, we're going to die here. Like, this is so bad. But I think that's wrong, because if you give that message, people may give up. I think we will fix the climate situation. We will have to probably have an element of adaptation. So not everything will be mitigation. I think it's too late to basically cancel the whole effect of climate change. But we will survive, and we will have a future, and that's clear. And the human race has had challenges before and has survived, and this is one more. This is probably bigger and kind of unexpected in a way. We in the 70s or 60s or 70s or 80s, we didn't really imagine that this could happen, and that the CO2 would have this effect on the warming, and the warming will have this effect on the extreme climate events. But we will survive. So yeah, I am optimistic, and I think we should really show that hope also to the younger generations.
Alejandro, you're an incredibly busy man, as Michael said. Thank you so much for your time. But what is next for you? Because I have seen this magnificent looking electric race boat, the E1 series. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yes. So that's next. Yeah, that's next. We are working on the first prototype of the electric race boat. I think recreational boats pollute a lot in seas, in waters, in rivers, in lakes all around the world, and we want to create a championship that can promote electric recreational mobility. So batteries are not for big ships, because 90% of the ship would have to be a battery, but for day boats they're perfect. And I'm thinking, for example, Sydney Harbour, for one of the locations of one of the E1 races. It could be incredible. And then a lot of the boats that people use during the day in Sydney Harbour could be electric. So that's what E1 series wants to do. And yeah, we had a really cool design from this Norwegian designer, Sophie Horn, and really looks amazing. The response has been great, and now we just have to make it work.
Well, we can't wait to see what happens there. Alejandro, thanks so much for your time, and thank you for your vision. Honestly, with Formula E, Extreme E, now E1, it is fantastic to see. We personally are very excited, though, for the last race in the UK, the Jurassic X Prix. I'd ask you who you'd tip, but that's probably not okay, because we've been sort of saying that we've commentating.
I already said Chip Ganassi. You already said he wanted to say that. We're not allowed to say that on this podcast.
I wanted to win Chip Ganassi that race because they were going first and they really deserved it, and they had broken the car in every single other race. So but for the championship, I think we have two great candidates. We have Hamilton and Rosberg. So the history repeats itself. And we have an Australian driver on the mix. I would say between both of them, I'd be really happy with either one.
Well, either way, it's been a huge success this year. 2022 is going to be bigger again. Thank you so much for your time. Yeah, we can't wait to see who wins in the Jurassic X Prix.
Thank you for following, and I'll see you here in the Jurassic X Prix.
Great to chat with the man who invented it all. Everything here on this podcast anyway, Alejandro Agag, the CEO of Extreme E, in its first season, of course, to hear how he thinks it's been going and what he thinks the future does hold. And I'm sure for him at least, certainly for the series, but I can't wait to see what is next for him.
It's also good to hear him talk about issues that have been happening with the car and him just tackling them straight on, saying, not happy with how they've been breaking down. We want to fix it. I know there's been lots of conversations around different forums and different message threads around the internet. So it's great, of course. I'm sure he's always been aware of it, but it's great to have that kind of attitude from him. Look, first season, it's always going to have teething problems. He's obviously learnt a lot from his time at Formula E. I could not believe that he had only $100,000 in the bank account with $25 million worth of supply debt only after 4 races, Michael. I mean, this is a guy who knows how to make this kind of thing work. So I feel very comfortable, at least, with Extreme E being in his hands for the second season. But certainly the lessons learned from this year certainly sound like they're going to be implemented for next year.
Yes. If you were on an airplane, he was the pilot, you'd feel safe. Maybe not literally in the metaphor. That makes sense. I don't know if he has a pilot's license, so I
Probably both.
Maybe wouldn't feel safe about that. But yes, I just like what he had to say, though. The idea of just continuing, keep going, keep pushing. Okay, but I think is a good message overall, not just as a business message or whatever. But I think that is sort of the whole point, right? It's easy to bury your head in the sand or to get caught up in sort of the drama and catastrophize things, whether it is the cars breaking down or whether it is the broader issues in the world. But as long as we can keep moving, we can find solutions to these things. And
there's certainly lots that we can do at home. We've spoken about this with most of our guests who have joined us from the Extreme E Science Committee, and that's been fantastic to listen to the little steps that we can take at home. So you can read out about more of those on Extreme E's website, and of course, by subscribing to their YouTube channel, some fantastic content, of course, coming up around COP26, and that already exists, of course, beforehand as well. But certainly, Michael, we're coming to the very pointy end of the season. I tried to extract who he thought would win the championship, which is potentially a little cheeky of me. But as he said, it will be a replay of Hamilton v. Rosberg. Not that we needed one, but it's going to be fantastic. Only a couple of weeks to go until the Jurassic X Prix, of course, but fantastic that he is just as excited as everyone else to see what happens at the end.
Well, in some respects, it is the battle we wanted, right? That's no slight on the rest of the teams who all have a good argument to say that they should have scored more points over the course of the year, and they've all been competitive in various points throughout the year. But Hamilton and Rosberg are two titans individual titans, really. They don't even previously own, really, massive manufacturing bases for motorsport as some of the other ones have. But in terms of that, notoriety, that's why they got involved, because they, wanted to get involved in this idea of the sport. And now those two titans are going to go at it again in a battle for the championship. It's also two great teams of drivers as well. I can't wait to see how they're going to tackle that final round, because as we've talked about before, the pressure does ratchet up when it's now or never. And, just because the points lead is if it was with Rosberg X Racing doesn't mean that's where it's going to end at the end of the weekend.
There's certainly been a lot of bad luck for X44 this year. They are due a good turn, that is for sure. Well, thank you so much for listening to this podcast, for joining us on the off-track journey thus far. You can continue joining us, as Michael said a little earlier, by hitting that subscribe button wherever you're listening. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please feel free to leave a rating and review. We really appreciate it. But it is time to say goodbye for now. We'll chat in a couple of weeks' time ahead of the Jurassic X Prix.
See you then.